Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to talk about bearded dragons. First, I want to apologize that there's no video for this one. Unfortunately, my webcam is now outdated and no longer works with my PC aside from the microphone. So until I get a new one, I apologize guys. Now let's move on to the video. Some of you know I have 4 bearded dragons that I love very much. They're all central bearded dragons, and I adopted them from Daichu bearded dragons. Their names are Hades, Lilith, Athena, and Calypso. But what's the real care that goes into these exotic animals? If you're considering getting a bearded dragon, watch this video to see if this is actually the right pet for you. So you're thinking about getting a bearded dragon. Bearded dragons, while regarded as one of the best beginner reptiles because of their ease of care, behaviors, size, and how long they live, can actually be a pretty expensive pet. Now let's start with the tank setup. Most bearded dragon owners will build their own tanks due to the fact that it's usually cheaper, and tanks bought from pet stores usually aren't enough for the dragons or don't provide everything they need and are not big enough. At minimum, a 40-gallon breeder tank is big enough for one dragon while it's growing. Tanks smaller than that should not be used except as feeder tanks. By feeder tanks, I mean if you have a baby dragon that's having trouble catching its food and needs to temporarily be placed in a smaller tank in order to be fed. If you would like to build your own tank, I recommend checking out the Weeby Reptiles channel, as Michael has his enclosure on there and how to build it. I'll put a link to the video down below in the description for you if you'd like to check it out. So once you have the tank itself, whether you built it or bought it, you'll need to install things such as lights that provide heat, UVB lights, substrate, a temperature and humidity reader, and some logs, rocks, or wood to climb on. If you have built your own tank like Weeby's enclosure, you will probably not need to add substrate if you do not want to. So let's start with the lifespan of bearded dragons. In captivity, bearded dragons can live upward of 6 to 8 years or longer, depending on how well they're cared for. Some have also been known to live as long as 15 to 20 years, but generally the maximum a dragon in captivity can reach is usually up to 14 years if cared for properly. Sexing your dragon. Sometimes it can be difficult for a beginner reptile owner to determine the gender of a bearded dragon. However, to determine what gender your dragon is, males will generally have 2 bulges on the left and right side under their tail that appears to create an hourglass shape or appearance, while female bearded dragons generally only have 1 bulge at their vent. Behaviors. Bearded dragons can be very interactive and display some comical behaviors. Males often do a beard display, which is when the dragon will puff its beard out by extending the bone-like structures in their beard, giving it the appearance of a beard. They may also choose to darken the color while doing this, and it can be used as a defensive gesture as well. However, beards are not limited to just males. Females will also sometimes show off their beard. Bearded dragons can also head bob. They will move their head up and down at various speeds. This is usually a sign of dominance and can also be performed during the mating season. You may also see your dragon do an arm wave. This is usually done by females in response to males after a beard display or head bob. This is a gesture usually performed in submission as well as recognition to a more dominant dragon too. Dragons may also bow down slightly, almost like a head bob, while performing an arm wave. Dragons will also raise their tails or curl them almost straight up when they are alert or hunting prey. This can also signify a level of acceptance and can be seen during the breeding seasons too. Size. Central bearded dragons generally grow up to 20 inches long. Dragons, however, can grow at different rates depending on how well they're cared for and if they have everything they need. You can stunt a dragon's growth if you do not have the proper care or setup for your dragon. So let's move on to lighting and UVB. Lighting should run at least 12 to 14 hours a day and be off for the remainder. You will want the basking spot around 100 to 110 degrees, and for this you can use a 40 or 60 watt spotlight where the basking spot is. Baby dragons need the basking spot to be closer to 110 degrees in order to digest their food. You should never use heat rocks, as dragons soak heat through their backs and can end up burning themselves when laying on a heat rock or even killing themselves. Place a rock or wood piece under the basking spot for the dragon to perch on while basking. You should have your light suspended above the basking spot without mesh or glass blocking it, as it can filter as much as 40% of the light produced before it even reaches your dragon. You may need to adjust the light's height in order to get the temperature correct. You will also need to make sure that you have a full spectrum UVB light fluorescent tube bulb that's also suspended over the cage within 6 to 10 inches of the basking area and not blocked by mesh or glass as well. Make sure that is a tube and not a compact coil bulb. UVB is very important for bearded dragons. Without it, it can lead to metabolic bone disease in dragons. UVB light should be changed every 6 months, and also be sure to use a digital temperature reader that reads both temperature and humidity for your tanks to monitor that they're the correct temperature and humidity. The cold side of your tank should be around 80 to 85 degrees, with nighttime temperatures being able to safely drop into the 60s. Humidity should be in the range of 35 to 55%. Being above or below that can cause problems for your dragons. Substrate and accessories. There's many different substrates that you can use, but it's recommended to use newspaper, paper towels, tile, slate, non-adhesive shelf liner, non-adhesive linoleum, or reptile carpets and mats. Keep in mind that you do not want to use particle substrates such as sand because it can lead to impaction if your dragon ingests it. Before suggesting that bearded dragons are a desert reptile that we associate with sand, they do not actually live in Sahara Desert-style sand dunes. Their natural substrate mostly consists of hard-packed dirt, sand mixed with dirt, rocks, and leaves. So straight sand is not the most accurate. If you must use a particle substrate, the best option is a mixture of topsoil and play sand. The sand will mix with the dirt, making it less dusty, and it also allows for your bearded dragon to dig tunnels due to the dirt being able to hold its shape. Always be aware of the risks when picking a particle substrate. It's not recommended to use loose substrates for dragons under a year old, as they tend to lick everything and may ingest it. If you want to provide your dragon with a dig box, you can fill it with play sand, topsoil with sand mix, alfalfa pellets, or millet seeds. You will need to spot clean your tank daily, especially if you have a baby dragon, as they poop a lot more often than adult dragons, and if you're keeping multiple dragons in a cage. You want to make sure that you also provide logs, wood, or rocks for your dragon to climb and bask on. Rocks, slate, and tile can also help keep your dragon's nails trimmed down, as they'll get filed while the dragons climb on them. Next up, we have feeding. Baby bearded dragons should be fed 2 to 3 times a day while they're growing. It is usually recommended to let baby dragons eat as much as they can within a 10 to 15 minute period. And then you should remove all additional feeders at night so that they do not stress your dragon out or bite them. Make sure to choose the appropriate size food for your dragon, as food items that are too big can kill your dragon. A good rule of thumb is that prey should be no longer than the width of your dragon's mouth, or if you really want to be super safe, some people do suggest no bigger than the width between their eyes. Baby bearded dragons should have about 80% protein and 20% veggies in their diet, while adults need 20% protein and 80% veggies. You will likely need to mail order your bugs for your dragons, as pet shops usually do not carry the ones that you should get for your dragons. Some great places to order bugs for your dragons are New York worms or rainbow mealworms. I will leave a link down below to both of these sites and you can check them out for yourself. Bugs, however, can be pricey, so most bearded dragon owners will choose to breed and raise their own dubia roaches for their dragons, as they are the easiest to care for and are excellent feeders because of their high protein and calcium with low fat. You should never feed your dragons mealworms because of the high phosphorus and fat ratio, as well as their hard chitin shell that's hard for dragons to digest. Some other feeders for your bearded dragon can include butterworms, phoenix worms, silkworms, waxworms, hornworms, superworms, and crickets. You will also want to provide a salad daily for your dragon to eat. For vegetables, you can provide alfalfa plant, cactus pad or leaves raw, cactus pears, also known as the spiky pear, I believe, collard greens, dandelion greens, endives, escarole, mustard greens, acorn, butternut, hubbard, scallop spaghetti or summer squash, and turnip greens as a daily staple. I'll leave a food chart below in the description that also contains other food items you can and can't feed your dragon as well. If you choose to purchase your feeders, you may be spending up to $100 or more every time you need to order new bugs. So keep this in mind if you want to get a baby dragon, as they will eat a lot and it can become expensive trying to keep up with their bugs. However, if you choose to breed your own bugs, it's recommended to get a dubia colony at least 1 to 2 years before getting your dragon, so it can allow time for the colony to grow and breed. You'll also want to put a set amount of the bugs aside from your colony. That way you're not going in and out of your bin to feed your dragons. So just leave the rest to breed and set aside a specific amount for your dragons to feed from. Next is supplementation and gut loading. Bearded dragons require supplements in captivity. You'll need a calcium powder such as Repashy Superfoods SuperCal HYD, and a multivitamin powder such as Repashy Superfoods Supervite. I typically dust my feeders 5 times a week with the SuperCal and 2 times a week with the Supervite. You'll also need to gut load your feeders before feeding them to your dragons with fresh fruits and veggies, as well as a chow diet, depending on the feeders that you have. Make sure you dust your feeders as well before you give them to your dragons after you gut load them. This will ensure that they're getting all of the nutrients that they should have out of the feeders. Next, water. Bearded dragons should have a dry cage. However, you will need to spray the heads of the babies with like a spray bottle filled with water for as long as they'll drink from it. If you choose to bathe your babies in a sink or a small tub, you will need to monitor them closely, as they could potentially drown themselves or other dragons that are with them. Adult dragons should be soaked at least once a week. Dragons may also poop while they're soaking in the water, and you should change it immediately after your dragon has pooped. Some dragons do enjoy swimming in the water. If you choose to put your dragon in a small pool or bathtub, make sure that the water does not go above their arms, since this can stress your dragon out. Multiple dragons. While you may see people housing dragons together, it is actually uncommon for them to get along. Dragons are very territorial, and it is best to house them alone. Male dragons will kill each other and fight to the death. Male dragons that are housed with female dragons usually leads to the male dragon constantly dominating the female and trying to breed, which may cause your female to not thrive as well as they could. Female dragons with female dragons sometimes works, as they may tolerate each other, but it is still recommended to house your dragons separately so that they can thrive properly. Housing multiple dragons together can also lead to stressed dragons, as one may dominate the other constantly. They can also cause the more submissive dragon to become underfed and not get enough lighting, as they will fight over the basking spot and even food. Even if your dragons do not appear to fight all of the time, it can still occur, which can lead to dead dragons or dragons with missing limbs. Dragons do not care whether they are siblings or not. Adult dragons will also kill dragons that are smaller than them in an attempt to eat them, so you should never house your adult bearded dragon with a baby bearded dragon. Lastly, we have diseases. Now, this may not include all diseases that dragons can get, but it does highlight a few that are very important to look out for. Like all creatures, dragons can get sick as well. Some of the diseases and disorders that dragons can get are mites, terminal ingestion, thermal burns, calcium deficiency, vitamin A toxicity, respiratory infections, internal parasites, egg binding, and adenovirus. So let's start with mites. Usually you can find or first notice a bearded dragon has mites around the eyes or corners of the mouth, as they will look like little round black, brown, or red creatures. Mites can usually be treated with many commercial products, but it is always best to visit a veterinarian for a stronger solution in case you can't get rid of them. It can take up to a month of continuous care to get rid of mites. Mites can also be transferred among reptiles. Next, we have terminal ingestion. This is usually caused when a young dragon swallows a food item that is too big for its size. Usually when this occurs, they will extend their hind limbs straight back as if paralyzed. However, you could try raising the dragon's basking temperature or soaking the dragon in warm water to induce a bowl movement and see if that helps. Please note that dragons can also extend their hind limbs while basking. The difference is that a dragon with terminal ingestion will be unable to move the extended legs or walk and run at all. Next, we have thermal burns. These are caused by direct contact with a heat source, such as hot rocks or heat rocks, and causes the scales to burn, which results in blisters. Blisters can break open and allow for a second bacterial infection to occur. This can result in your dragon dying, depending on the severity. Next, we have calcium deficiency. Without calcium and vitamin D3, this can slow your dragon's growth rate and also cause metabolic bone disease. The first signs of calcium deficiency are usually uncontrolled twitching in the dragon's toes or legs. This disease can be fatal if not treated immediately. Next is vitamin A toxicity. This is a problem that occurs with dragons that are over-supplemented. Many multivitamins can contain levels of vitamin A which should be offered sparingly. You can tell that your dragon has it as it will cause swelling of the throat and eyes and bloat the rest of the body along with lethargy. Next, respiratory infections. Bearded dragons usually do not get respiratory infections, but prolonged exposure to low temperatures, improper humidity, and poor cage conditions can result in respiratory infections. Raising the temperature of the cage and using antibiotics is typically the treatment process for this. Next, we have internal parasites. Pinworms are especially common in bearded dragons. Signs of internal parasites can include weight loss, worms in stool, and runny stool. You will need to take your bearded dragon to a vet in order to find out what kind they have. Be sure to have a stool sample on hand for your vet because that's what they will need in order to check your beardy for parasites. Next, we have egg binding. This usually occurs for a few different reasons, which could include biological malformation, which means that there may not be enough room for the animal to pass the eggs, or that the eggs are large or malformed and cannot fit through the oviduct. Malnutrition and dehydration are also contributing factors to egg binding. Treatment can include removal of the eggs through surgery or a simple massage, depending on the severity. Lastly, we have adenovirus. I apologize. It is a common infection that typically affects younger dragons, but it can occur at any age in dragons. Dragons may become weak, do not eat, and quickly die after becoming sick with this disease. Some may show a more chronic infection in which they may fail to thrive, are weak to the point that they may become paralyzed, and periodically do not eat. However, this disease usually always leads to death in dragons, unfortunately. One of the most common diseases in reptiles is metabolic bone disease. It refers to the abnormalities of the bones generally caused by a broad spectrum of things. In bearded dragons, metabolic bone disease is usually caused by poor lighting and lack of UVB, lack of calcium, lack of vitamins, and improper feeding or care. This usually leads to softened bones that are easily broken, swollen limbs, and tremors while the dragon moves. The bones will begin to deform as the dragon's body begins to eat away at them and may turn into muscle twitching, seizures, loss of appetite, and loss of energy. Eventually, if left untreated, the dragon will die. It is best to catch this early on so that way you can try to reverse some of the effects caused by metabolic bone disease. And that's all I have for you in this video. If there's something I missed, feel free to discuss it down below in the comments. And remember that you should always do lots of research before getting a new pet. And use your best judgment when it comes to caring for that pet. There are so many wonderful guides out there and sites with people willing to help you if you get stuck along the way. So be sure to check them out. And if you need help, just ask. Thanks for watching.